There is a silence that comes from fear. There is a silence that comes from defeat. And then there is another kind of silence entirely. A silence born from understanding. A silence that does not shrink a person. A silence that reveals how much they have grown. Most people do not recognize the difference. When they see an older man speaking less than he once did, they assume he has become distant. When they see an older woman choosing solitude over constant company, they assume she has become withdrawn. When they see someone no longer eager to argue, explain, impress, or persuade, they assume something has been lost. But often the opposite is true. Something has been found. Wisdom, the kind of wisdom that cannot be purchased, cannot be taught in a classroom, cannot be inherited, only earned. Earned through years of disappointment, years of observation, years of victories that did not feel as satisfying as expected, and failures that taught more than success ever could. The young often believe wisdom will make them louder. That knowledge will make them more cert. That understanding will give them more to say. Yet life frequently produces the opposite effect. The deeper a person understands human nature, the less interested they become in unnecessary noise. Marcus Aurelius ruled an empire. He commanded armies, held authority over millions. Yet when he wrote his private reflections, there was no arrogance, no need to dominate, no desire to display superiority. Instead, there was humility, reflection, a constant effort to understand himself. This is one of the great paradoxes of wisdom. The more a person learns, the more aware they become of how much remains unknown. The ignorant mind is often loud because it mistakes certainty for knowledge. The wise mind grows quieter because it recognizes complexity. It sees the hidden layers beneath every situation. It understands that people are rarely exactly what they appear to be. It recognizes that every human being carries invisible struggles, invisible fears, invisible wounds, invisible hopes. And because of this, judgment becomes more difficult. Certainty becomes more difficult. Condemnation becomes more difficult. Compassion becomes easier. Consider a mountain. When viewed from a distance, it appears simple, solid, clear, easy to understand. But as you climb it, details emerge. Hidden valleys, unseen cliffs, unexpected paths. The closer you get, the more complexity reveals itself. Human beings are much the same. The older you become, the more lives you have encountered. The more stories you have heard. The more contradictions you have witnessed. You begin realizing that reality is rarely as simple as it first appears. And this realization changes the way you speak. Not because you become weak, because you become careful. The wise person understands that words possess weight. A careless sentence can wound. A reckless opinion can divide. An unnecessary argument can consume peace. And peace becomes increasingly valuable with age. When you are young, you often believe energy is endless. Time feels abundant. Conflict seems inexpensive. You argue because you can. You defend every opinion because it feels important. You chase the final word as though victory depends upon it. Then life begins teaching different lessons. You discover that many arguments produce no winners, only exhaustion. You discover that being right does not always create peace. You discover that convincing another person is far more difficult than you once imagined. And slowly, your relationship with silence begins changing. You stop speaking merely to fill empty space. You stop responding to every criticism. You stop participating in every debate. Not because you lack opinions, because you have learned the value of restraint. Epictetus taught that we have 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason: to listen more than we speak. This idea becomes increasingly meaningful with age. Because listening reveals things speaking cannot. Listening reveals motives, patterns, character, pain. Many people reveal themselves not when questioned, but when given space. The wise understand this. So they become observers. not detached from life, attentive to it. They watch, they listen, they learn, and while others rush to react, they pause. The pause is important. Within that pause exists freedom. The freedom to choose a response rather than surrendering to impulse. The freedom to remain calm while others become emotional. The freedom to protect peace when conflict offers temptation. Marcus Aurelius often reminded himself that another person's behavior belongs to them. Your response belongs to you. This distinction changes everything. Because much of human suffering emerges from confusion about what is ours to control. We try controlling opinions, controlling outcomes, controlling other people. And when these efforts fail, frustration follows. The Stoics understood a different path. Control yourself. Govern your thoughts. Guide your actions. Shape your character. Let the rest unfold according to nature. This perspective naturally creates quietness, not passivity. Strength, because genuine strength rarely needs advertisement. The river does not announce its power. The ocean does not boast about its depth. The sun does not argue for its importance. They simply fulfill their nature. And in doing so, they command respect without demanding it. Many older people eventually reach a point where they no longer feel compelled to prove themselves. Not because ambition disappears, because identity becomes secure. They know who they are. And once a person knows who they are, much of the noise falls away. The endless need for validation. The endless need for approval. The endless need to impress. All of these begin losing their grip. The silence that emerges is not emptiness. It is confidence. A confidence rooted not in superiority but in self-knowledge. The world often misunderstands this kind of quiet. It mistakes calmness for weakness, restraint for passivity, reflection for hesitation. Yet history repeatedly demonstrates otherwise. Some of the strongest individuals who ever lived possessed remarkable stillness. Not because they lacked courage, because they had mastered themselves. And self-mastery remains one of the rarest achievements in human life. Far rarer than wealth, far rarer than fame, far rarer than power. For it requires victory over the most difficult opponent a person will ever face. The impulses, fears, desires, and distractions within their own mind. And those who spend years fighting that battle eventually discover something unexpected. The deepest strength rarely arrives with a raised voice. It arrives quietly. It arrives quietly. Not with the sound of applause. Not with public recognition. Not with crowds gathering to celebrate it. The deepest strength often develops in solitude. Beyond the view of the world. There comes a moment in many lives when a person realizes that much of what once seemed important was merely noise. The need to be understood by everyone. The need to defend every opinion. The need to correct every misunderstanding. The need to respond to every challenge. At one time, these things may have felt necessary, perhaps even noble. But age has a way of revealing the true cost of unnecessary battles. Every argument consumes energy. Every resentment occupies space. Every grudge demands attention. And attention, perhaps more than anything else, becomes precious as the years pass. When you are young, attention feels abundant. You spend it freely, sometimes carelessly. You chase distractions. You pursue approval. You become entangled in conflicts that seem significant in the moment but fade into irrelevance with time. Then one day you begin noticing something. The years are moving faster. The seasons arrive and disappear more quickly. People you once knew are no longer here. Places that once felt permanent have changed. Entire chapters of your life now exist only as memories. And suddenly, attention no longer feels limitless. It feels valuable, sacred. You become more selective about where it goes. You stop feeding every disagreement. You stop nurturing every irritation. You stop allowing every opinion access to your peace. This is not indifference. It is wisdom. A gardener does not water every patch of ground equally. He nourishes what he wishes to grow. The wise person treats attention in the same way. They understand that whatever receives attention gains strength. Fear grows when fed. Anger grows when fed. Bitterness grows when fed. But so do gratitude, patience, compassion, inner peace. The older you become, the more clearly this truth reveals itself. You begin recognizing that your inner world is a garden. And not everything deserves cultivation. Marcus Aurelius spent years surrounded by chaos, political intrigue, military conflict, disease, loss, betrayal. Yet throughout his writings there is a recurring theme. Return to yourself. Again and again he reminds himself to retreat inward. Not to escape reality, but to reconnect with clarity. Because clarity rarely emerges from noise. It emerges from stillness. This is why many wise people become quieter with age. Not because they have less to say. Because they have learned where truth is most often found. Not in constant reaction. Not in endless discussion. But in observation, reflection, stillness. Imagine a lake high in the mountains. When disturbed by wind, its surface becomes chaotic. Reflections disappear. Shapes distort. Nothing can be seen clearly. But when the water becomes still, everything changes. The sky appears. The clouds appear. The surrounding mountains become visible within its depths. The lake does not create clarity. It reveals it. The human mind functions much the same way. When constantly agitated, clarity becomes difficult. When constantly reacting, wisdom becomes difficult. When constantly seeking external validation, peace becomes difficult. The wise learn to cultivate stillness. And from that stillness emerges understanding. They begin seeing patterns that others overlook. They notice how often people speak from fear rather than truth. How often anger hides pain. How often arrogance conceals insecurity. How often criticism reflects the critic more than the target. These observations soften the need for constant reaction. Because once you understand human nature, many things stop feeling personal. A harsh comment, an unfair judgment, a misunderstanding. You realize that every person is carrying an invisible story. A story you may never fully know. And because you understand this, compassion becomes easier than condemnation. This is another reason wisdom often appears as quietness. The wise no longer feel compelled to judge everything. They have seen too much, experienced too much, learned too much. Life has shown them that certainty is often fragile. Reality is often more complex than it first appears. And so they approach others with humility. Not because they lack conviction, because they understand limitations. Seneca once observed that we suffer more often in imagination than in reality. The older you become, the more examples of this truth you accumulate. You remember the worries that never materialized, the fears that never came true, the disasters that existed only within the mind. You remember sleepless nights spent anticipating outcomes that never arrived. And gradually, trust begins replacing anxiety. Not trust that everything will unfold perfectly. Trust that you can face whatever unfolds. This distinction is important. The young often seek certainty. The wise seek resilience. Certainty depends upon circumstances. Resilience depends upon character. And character remains available even when circumstances change. Even when plans fail. Even when losses occur. Even when life unfolds differently than expected. The quiet person has often learned this lesson deeply. They no longer require guarantees before moving forward. They no longer demand complete control before finding peace. They understand that uncertainty is not the enemy. Resistance to uncertainty is. A tree does not resist the changing seasons. It adapts. It sheds what must be shed. Endures what must be endured. And trusts the rhythms of nature. The wise attempt something similar. They stop fighting every change. They stop clinging desperately to what cannot remain. They recognize that aging itself is part of nature. Not a mistake. Not a punishment. A process. A movement. A transformation. And within that transformation lies a gift. Perspective. Perspective reveals what truly matters. Not status. Not appearances. Not winning every argument. Not receiving universal approval. What matters are simpler things. Integrity, presence, meaningful relationships, a peaceful conscience, a mind that is not at war with itself. These are treasures often discovered late. But once discovered, they change everything. Because a person who possesses them no longer needs much from the world. They no longer chase validation from strangers. They no longer seek identity through comparison. They no longer measure their worth through public opinion. Instead, they begin carrying something far more valuable. An inner stability. A quiet center that remains steady regardless of external circumstances. And when a person develops that center, something remarkable happens. The world may remain noisy, but they do not have to join it. The world may remain restless, but they do not have to imitate it. The world may continue demanding reactions, but they become free to choose stillness, free to choose patience, free to choose silence. And in that silence, a deeper wisdom continues unfolding. And in that silence, a deeper wisdom continues unfolding. Perhaps this is why so many wise people seem comfortable being alone. Not lonely. Alone. The two are not the same. Loneliness is the pain of being disconnected. Solitude is the peace of being connected to oneself. The young often confuse these states because they have not yet learned the difference. They seek constant stimulation, constant companionship, constant distraction. The silence of an empty room feels uncomfortable. The absence of conversation feels unsettling. The lack of activity feels like something is missing. But with age, something begins to change. You spend enough years around people to understand their beauty, and enough years around people to understand their limitations. You witness kindness. You witness cruelty. You witness loyalty. You witness betrayal. You witness generosity. You witness selfishness. You witness the entire spectrum of human nature. And eventually, you stop expecting perfection. Not from others. Not even from yourself. This is where much suffering begins to dissolve. Because disappointment is often born from unrealistic expectations. We expect permanence in a world of change. We expect certainty in a world of unpredictability. We expect people to behave according to our standards rather than their own understanding. Then reality arrives. And reality rarely negotiates. The wise person eventually stops demanding that life be different than it is. Not because they become passive, because they become aligned with truth. Marcus Aurelius understood this deeply. Every day he reminded himself that he would encounter difficult people. Selfish people, arrogant people, unreasonable people. Not as a source of despair, as preparation. Because what surprises us often disturbs us. What we accept becomes easier to navigate. This acceptance creates an extraordinary calm. Imagine carrying an umbrella because you know rain is possible. When rain arrives, you are not offended. You are prepared. The same principle applies to life. When you accept that misunderstanding is inevitable, it loses much of its power. When you accept that loss is inevitable, grief becomes gentler. When you accept that change is inevitable, transitions become less frightening. The wise person does not expect immunity from pain. They simply stop being shocked by reality. This is one reason age often produces quietness. The older you become, the more evidence you gather. Evidence that life contains both joy and sorrow, gain and loss, arrival and departure, birth and deaths. The entire rhythm of existence begins revealing itself. And as this rhythm becomes clearer, many unnecessary struggles disappear. You stop fighting the tide. You stop demanding certainty. You stop insisting that everything unfold according to your preferences. Instead, you begin participating in life rather than resisting it. There is a profound dignity in this. A dignity rarely celebrated by modern culture. The world often glorifies control. Control your future. Control your image. Control your outcomes. Control your environment. Yet the Stoics pointed toward a different kind of mastery. Not mastery over the world. Mastery over oneself. Because the world remains unpredictable. People remain unpredictable. Events remain unpredictable. But your response remains yours. Your character remains yours. Your choices remain yours. And when you understand this, a strange freedom emerges. You no longer feel responsible for carrying what belongs to fate. You focus on what belongs to you. This simplicity creates peace. Not because life becomes easier. Because confusion decreases. You stop exhausting yourself trying to manage the uncontrollable. And that reclaimed energy becomes available for something richer. Presence. The older you become, the more precious presence becomes. A sunset means more. A conversation means more. A quiet morning means more. The laughter of a grandchild means more. A walk beneath trees means more. Not because these things changed. Because you changed. You finally understand that life was never hidden inside grand achievements. Life was happening in ordinary moments all along. Many spend decades chasing significance while overlooking existence. They pursue bigger houses, bigger titles, bigger recognition, only to discover later that peace was never hiding there. Peace was hiding inside attention, inside gratitude, inside awareness. The wise become quieter because they are finally listening. Listening to the wind moving through leaves. Listening to their own conscience. Listening to the lessons hidden within ordinary days. The noise of ambition gradually gives way to the voice of understanding. And understanding changes priorities. At 20s, being admired may feel important. At 40, being successful may feel important. At 60 and beyond, being at peace often becomes far more valuable than either. Not because achievement loses meaning. Because peace reveals its superiority. What good is accomplishment without peace? What good is recognition without peace? What good is wealth without peace? A restless mind can turn abundance into suffering. A peaceful mind can find richness in simplicity. Seneca understood this. Marcus Aurelius understood this. The greatest Stoic thinkers repeatedly returned to this truth. The quality of life depends less on external conditions than on internal perspective. This perspective deepens with age, especially after loss. Loss is one of life's most difficult teachers, yet it is also one of its most honest. The loss of loved ones, the loss of youth, the loss of certainty, the loss of dreams that never arrived. These experiences leave marks upon the soul. Not all wounds become weaknesses. Some become wisdom. Some become compassion. Some become depth. The person who has suffered and reflected often develops a gentleness impossible to learn from comfort alone. They become slower to judge, slower to condemn, slower to assume, because life has shown them how fragile every human being truly is. Behind confidence may be fear. Behind success may be loneliness. Behind anger may be grief. Behind silence may be strength. The older you become, the easier it becomes to see these hidden realities. And once you see them, your relationship with people changes forever. You become less interested in appearances, more interested in character, less interested in status, more interested in integrity, less interested in what people possess, more interested in who they are. This shift is subtle, yet it transforms everything. Because character endures when appearances fade. Integrity remains when circumstances change. Wisdom remains when youth departs. And perhaps this is why wise people become quieter with age. They are no longer searching for what the world can give them. They are discovering what time has been trying to teach them all along. That the deepest treasures are invisible. That the strongest foundations are internal. That the most meaningful victories occur within the soul. And as these truths settle more deeply into their hearts, another realization begins to emerge, one that changes how they see mortality itself. When people are young, death often feels distant. A concept, a future event, something that happens to other people. The horizon appears endless. The road seems to stretch forever. And because of this illusion, time is spent carelessly. Hours are wasted. Years are postponed. Conversations are delayed. Dreams are deferred. Apologies remain unspoken. Gratitude remains unexpressed. The young rarely intend to waste life. They simply assume there will always be more of it. Then age begins removing that assumption. Not cruelly, quietly, a funeral, an old friend gone, a parent gone, a familiar face missing from the world. And slowly, mortality stops being an abstraction. It becomes real. The Stoics did not hide from this reality. They looked directly at it. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself repeatedly that he was mortal. Not to become depressed, to become awake. For when death is remembered, life becomes clearer. The trivial begins to shrink. The essential begins to stand out. A person who remembers mortality rarely wants to spend an afternoon trapped in a pointless argument. A person who remembers mortality rarely wants to waste years seeking approval from strangers. A person who remembers mortality begins asking a different question. If my time is limited, what deserves it? This question changes everything. Because once time is recognized as finite, attention becomes sacred. You stop scattering it carelessly. You stop feeding endless drama. You stop carrying grudges for decades. You stop treating every criticism as a crisis. You begin protecting your peace not because you have become fragile, but because you understand value. A traveler crossing a desert guards water carefully. A person who understands mortality guards time carefully. This is one reason wise people become quieter with age. They are no longer trying to fill every moment. They are trying to honor it. The loud pursuit of significance often gives way to the quiet appreciation of existence itself. A sunrise, a cup of tea, the sound of rain, the laughter of family, a walk beneath trees. These things once overlooked become luminous. Not because they changed, because awareness changed. Seneca wrote that it is not that we have a short time to live, but that we waste much of it. Age reveals the truth of this observation. You begin seeing how many years were spent chasing what did not matter. How much energy was given to appearances. How many worries dissolved into nothing. How many fears never came true. And this realization can feel bittersweet. But it can also feel liberating. Because it invites a different way of living. Not a rushed life. Not a frantic life. A conscious life. A life where choices are made with awareness of their cost. Where relationships are valued more deeply. Where presence matters more than performance. Where peace becomes more precious than reputation. The wise do not become quiet because they have lost interest in life. They become quiet because they have discovered life more deeply. They have learned that existence is fragile. That every conversation may be the last. That every embrace may be the last. That every ordinary day is, in truth, extraordinary because it will never occur again. This awareness softens many unnecessary conflicts. It becomes difficult to stay angry for long when you remember that both you and the other person are temporary travelers. It becomes difficult to cling to pride when you remember how brief human life truly is. It becomes difficult to obsess over status when you remember that every title eventually disappears. Mortality is the great equalizer. Emperors and laborers, scholars and merchants, the celebrated and the forgot, All eventually return to silence. Marcus Aurelius knew this even while ruling Rome. He knew that fame fades, power fades, wealth fades, the body fades. What remains is the quality of the soul that lived. This understanding creates humility, and humility often expresses itself as quietness. The wise person no longer feels the need to dominate every conversation, to prove superiority, to display importance. They understand how small every human life is beneath the stars. And strangely, this awareness does not diminish life. It ennobles it. Because if life is temporary, then kindness matters more. Integrity matters more. Presence matters more. Love matters more. The older you become, the more clearly you see that the most meaningful moments were rarely the loudest ones. Not the public victories. Not their applause. Not the recognition. Often it was the quiet moments. A hand held during grief. A conversation at dusk. A meal shared with family. A walk with someone you love. A peaceful evening when nothing needed to be proven. These are the moments that remain. These are the moments that give life weight. And once a person understands this, many ambitions naturally soften. Not because ambition is wrong. Because perspective has changed. The mountain climber who reaches a high summit sees the landscape differently than the traveler in the valley. Age is a kind of summit. From it, you can see the long road behind you. You can see how quickly decades pass. How often people change. How frequently certainty disappears. And with that view comes a profound question. What do I want the remaining years to feel like? Many wise people answer this question not with noise, but with peace. Not with endless striving, but with alignment. Not with constant explanation, but with authenticity. They choose fewer arguments, fewer performances, fewer obligations that drain the spirit. They choose depth over spectacle, meaning over image, stillness over chaos. And as this choice deepens, silence no longer feels empty. It feels full, full of awareness, full of gratitude, full of understanding. The world may interpret this quietness as withdrawal, but often it is their opposite. It is engagement with life at a deeper level. A level where every day is recognized as temporary. Every relationship as precious. Every breath as borrowed. And when a person truly understands that everything is borrowed, a remarkable gentleness begins to emerge. Toward others. Toward life. Toward themselves. Toward others. Toward life. Toward themselves. This may be one of the least understood transformations that comes with genuine wisdom. The young often believe strength means becoming harder, more resistant, more impenetrable, more capable of enduring without feeling. But life teaches a different lesson. The strongest people are not always the hardest. Often they are the gentlest. Not because they are weak, because they understand. A person who has lived long enough eventually sees that everyone is carrying something. Some carry grief. Some carry regret. Some carry loneliness. Some carry fears they have never spoken aloud. Some carry wounds that remain invisible even to those closest to them. And once you begin seeing this, it becomes difficult to move through the world with arrogance. Compassion emerges naturally, not as an obligation, as a consequence of understanding. This is another reason wise people become quieter with age. They no longer assume they know the full story. They no longer rush to conclusions. They no longer feel compelled to judge every situation from a distance. Life has shown them too many hidden chapters, too many unexpected truths, too many moments where first impressions proved completely wrong. So they pause, they observe, they listen, and in doing so, they often discover more than those who speak the most. There is a peculiar confidence that develops when a person no longer needs to constantly express their importance. A confidence untouched by attention, untouched by recognition, untouched by praise. The Stoics understood this deeply. A person's worth does not increase because others notice it, nor does it decrease because others fail to notice it. The diamond remains valuable whether it is admired or buried. The stars remain magnificent whether anyone looks up. Truth remains true whether it is applauded or ignored. Yet much of modern life encourages the opposite belief. It encourages visibility over substance, recognition over character, performance over authenticity. Many spend years exhausting themselves trying to be seen, trying to be acknowledged, trying to be validated. And when these things fail to arrive, they suffer. Not because they lack value, because they attached value to the wrong things. Age has a way of correcting this illusion. Slowly, relentlessly, the older you become, the less energy remains for pretending. The less patience remains for superficiality. The less desire remains to compete in contests that no longer matter. And so the focus shifts inward, toward character, toward peace, toward meanings, toward the quiet work of becoming a better human being. This work rarely attracts attention. Most of it happens in silence. No audience applauds the moment someone chooses patience instead of anger. No crowd celebrates the decision to forgive. No headlines appear when a person overcomes resentment. Yet these victories may be among the greatest victories a human being can achieve, because they change the quality of a life. Marcus Aurelius spent much of his writing not analyzing the world, but analyzing himself. His greatest concern was not controlling others. It was governing his own mind. This remains one of the defining characteristics of wisdom. Attention turns inward. Not selfishly, responsibly. The wise person understands that their thoughts shape their experience of reality. Their perspective shapes their peace. Their character shapes their destiny. And because they understand this, they become increasingly selective about what they allow into their inner world. Not every opinion deserves entry. Not every criticism deserves residence. Not every conflict deserves participation. The older you become, the more clearly you recognize the difference between what matters and what merely demands attention. These are not the same thing. Many things demand attention. Very few deserve it. The world is filled with distractions disguised as importance, outrage disguised as virtue, noise disguised as significance, urgency disguised as meaning. And countless people spend their lives reacting to these things. One controversy after another, one fear after another, one distraction after another. Years disappear this way. Entire decades vanish. The wise eventually step back and ask a different question. What truly matters? The answer is often surprisingly simple. To live honorably, to love deeply, to remain truthful, to cultivate wisdom, to leave the world slightly better than it was found, to appreciate the gift of being alive while life remains. Everything else begins arranging itself around these priorities. And as it does, silence becomes less threatening. In fact, silence becomes nourishing. Within silence, the mind settles. Within silence, perspective returns. Within silence, the endless demands of the world lose their grip. Many people spend their entire lives running from silence. The wise eventually run toward it. Not because they dislike people, because they value clarity. A person cannot hear their deepest thoughts amid constant noise. A lake cannot reflect the sky while constantly disturbed. A soul cannot fully know itself while endlessly distracted. This is why solitude becomes increasingly precious with age. It provides space. Space to reflect. Space to understand. Space to remember what truly matters. And what truly matters becomes especially clear when you recognize that life is finite. Every year that passes quietly asks the same question. How will you spend what remains? Not someday. Not eventually. Now. The wise understand that time is not merely passing. Time is being exchanged. Every day, a portion of life is traded away. The question is whether that exchange is conscious. Whether those days are spent chasing illusions or cultivating meaning. Whether they are spent proving worth or expressing it. Whether they are spent seeking peace or postponing it. And perhaps this is the final gift that age offers to those willing to learn. The realization that peace was never waiting somewhere in the future. It was never hidden behind one more achievement, one more approval, one more victory, one more possession. Peace was available in the present moment all along. Hidden beneath distraction, hidden beneath ambition, hidden beneath fear, waiting patiently for awareness to uncover it. And once a person truly discovers this, something extraordinary happens. The frantic search begins to end. The endless proving begins to end. The restless striving begins to end. And in its place emerges something rare. A quiet soul. A steady heart. A mind no longer at war with itself. The kind of presence that cannot be manufactured. The kind of wisdom that cannot be faked. The kind of peace that only arrives when a person finally understands that life's greatest treasures were never outside of them in the first place. The kind of peace that only arrives when a person finally understands that life's greatest treasures were never outside of them in the first place. Perhaps that is what age has been trying to teach all along. Not through lectures, not through theories, but through experience. Year after year, season after season, loss after loss, joy after joy. Life keeps returning to the same lesson in different forms. What is essential cannot be taken. What is superficial cannot be kept. Most people spend the first half of life collecting. Collecting achievements. Collecting possessions. Collecting recognition. Collecting proof that they matter. Then, if they are fortunate, the second half of life becomes a process of releasing. Releasing illusions. Releasing unnecessary burdens. Releasing identities that no longer fit. Releasing the exhausting need to be everything to everyone. And with each thing released, something unexpected appears. Space. Space for gratitude. Space for reflection. Space for presence. Space for peace. The world often celebrates accumulation. Wisdom understands subtraction. The sculptor creates beauty not by adding endlessly, but by removing what does not belong. In much the same way, the wise person gradually removes what obscures the soul. The fears that no longer serve. The resentments that no longer heal. The comparisons that no longer matter. The endless noise that prevents them from hearing their own inner voice. What remains is simpler, but far richer. A person who no longer needs constant validation. A person who no longer fears silence. A person who no longer measures worth by attention. A person who has learned how to sit quietly with themselves and feel at home. This may be one of the greatest accomplishments available to a human being. Because many can command others. Few can command themselves. Many can fill a room with words. Few can remain at peace in silence. Many can impress strangers. Few can genuinely know themselves. Marcus Aurelius spent his life surrounded by power, yet his writings reveal a man engaged in a much deeper pursuit. Not power over nations, power over his own mind. Again and again he returned to the same challenge. Remain steady, remain just, remain humble, remain aligned with nature. Remain true to what is right regardless of what others choose. This is the foundation beneath all Stoic wisdom. Not the pursuit of perfection, the pursuit of alignment. To become the kind of person whose inner world remains stable even when the outer world is not. Because the outer world will always change. Empires rise and fall. Generations come and go. Opinions shift. Fortunes appear and disappear. Bodies age. Faces change. Time touches everything. Everything except the present moment. Everything except the choice available right now. This moment, this breath, this decision. The wise eventually learn to live here. Not trapped in yesterday. Not lost in tomorrow. Here, fully, consciously, presently. That is why they become quieter. Not because life has become smaller, because it has become clearer. They no longer need constant distraction from themselves. They no longer need endless activity to avoid reflection. They no longer need crowds to confirm their existence. They have discovered something stronger than approval, something deeper than attention, something more enduring than success. They have discovered inner sufficiency, though understanding that peace is an inside job. That dignity is an inside job. That meaning is an inside job. No audience can provide these things. No audience can remove them. They emerge from character, from awareness, from the relationship a person builds with their own conscience. This realization changes the way one ages. Growing older no longer feels like losing something. It begins feeling like uncovering something. Layer after layer falls away. Pretenses fall away. Insecurities lose their grip. Old fears weaken. Old competitions lose relevance. And beneath all of it stands the person who was there from the beginning. The person hidden beneath expectations, beneath obligations, beneath performances, beneath noise. The true self. The self that never needed to become extraordinary. Only authentic. There is great freedom in this discovery. The freedom to speak when speaking is necessary. The freedom to remain silent when silence is wiser. The freedom to walk away from what disturbs peace unnecessarily. The freedom to embrace what truly matters. The freedom to let others misunderstand without feeling compelled to correct every misconception. The freedom to live according to principles rather than reactions. And perhaps this is why wise people often seem calmer as they age. Not because life became easier, because resistance became smaller. They stopped fighting every current, stopped demanding certainty, stopped expecting permanence from temporary things, stopped expecting perfection from imperfect people. Instead, they learned to cooperate with reality, to move with life rather than against it, to appreciate what exists while it exists, to release what must eventually leave, to treasure each day precisely because it cannot be repeated. And when viewed through this lens, aging itself becomes something beautiful. Not a decline, a refinement, like a river that grows smoother after traveling many miles, like an ancient tree whose roots deepen with every passing season, like a mountain weathered by storms yet standing firm beneath the sky. The years remove what is unnecessary. If we allow them, the years teach what truly matters. If we listen, the years reveal where peace has always been. If we are willing to look. And so the wise become quieter. Not because they have less life within them. Because they have more. More understanding. More perspective. More patience. More gratitude. More awareness of what deserves attention and what does not. Their silence is not emptiness. It is fullness. A fullness built from experience. A fullness built from reflection. A fullness built from countless encounters with joy, suffering, loss, love, failure, hope, and time itself. The world may mistake this quietness for withdrawal. But those who understand recognize something else entirely. They recognize a person who has stopped chasing echoes and started listening to truth. A person who has stopped searching everywhere else for what was waiting within. A person who has learned that the loudest life is not always the richest one. And that sometimes the deepest wisdom speaks not through noise, but through the profound and unshakable peace of a soul that has finally come home to itself.